Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations in Horror, the podcast. I am your host, Kevin L. Powers. I'm also the festival director and program director of Something Wicked Film Festival and Events. And welcome to our podcast that delves deep into everything horror, cult, and everything else in between. We're kind of doing some special episodes right now for the next couple months. We're going to be doing some episodes that focus on some of the most famous and sometimes infamous films produced and or directed by the amazing Roger Corman. God bless, rest his soul, because he passed away and he had such a profound effect on the film industry, independent film arts, and lots of amazing directors that still work today. So we decided here at Conversation Horror to kind of sit down and kind of go through some of his films over the next couple months, just give you an idea of what we think of some of these films. So tonight's film, or today's film, is one of my favorites because it stars the amazing Vincent Price, which is The Masque of the Red Death. This is one of my favorites of both Corman and Vincent Price. And this is going to be a really interesting conversation that we're having with the amazing Thomas Tinnerello, who's returning to us for these frank conversations about everything that's Roger Corman. I mean, he's the one that suggested us do Roger Corman to begin with. So thank you, Thomas, for that suggestion. We're glad to have you here again.
Thank you, Kevin. And when I made that suggestion, Roger was still with us, and it's sad that we're finally doing this month under these circumstances. But better late than never, I suppose.
Yes, I think we were originally thinking about doing it much later in the year, but I think peppering these films over the next couple of months is going to be very amazing because it allows the people to get a long. This Roger Corman, and everyone who is out there who's listening who may not know who Roger Corman is, this guy produced so many films in so many different genres over the course of, I don't even know how many, I don't know when he started. He probably started in the 50s for all I know, but he has films that were released in the 60s up until the current decade because he never stopped working. He produced so many films of every type of genre, and he allowed a lot of up and coming directors to create, craft, and produce a lot of first films for a lot of people like James Cameron and John Sayles and Peter Bogdanovich, and all these amazing directors came from the house that Roger Corman built, and so he had some amazing films, and we're just glad we can sit here and talk about some.
And you're absolutely right, Kevin, because we talked about, we briefly mentioned during our Herschel Gordon Lewis 2000 Maniacs episode. I think I said it, that if you're talking cult and you're talking horror especially, there's really only two names that float to the surface. You could probably make a case for John Waters as well. But the two names that float to the surface are Herschel Gordon Lewis for his groundbreaking work in gore. Mm-hmm. But the other name is Roger Corman. And I don't think it's hyperbole to say that no one has touched more lives in the film industry than Roger Corman, simply by virtue of the fact that he stuck in there for so long, made so many different connections with people, and his main thing was making something entertaining, thrilling, a little transgressive, sometimes a lot transgressive, socially conscious. He always had some kind of social messaging in his films, and this one's no different. And do all that stuff, make it just big and loud sometimes, and make it the fastest, cheapest way possible. Because he was one of the most frugal filmmakers in the history of film. He is notorious for having made a feature film in 2 days. And that film was the original Little Shop of Horrors with Dick Miller and Jack Nicholson. And although Roger was quick to, I keep talking about him like I knew him first person. I wish I had. So I'm just going to call him Corman from now on because that just sounds weird to call him Roger. But yeah, so Corman would play down his own legend sometimes and saying, actually, I didn't really film Little Shop of Horrors in just 2 days. It was 2 days and a night. So, but he was notorious for just recycling sets, recycling effects, recycling. He remade Piranha, but used all of the special effects from the first Piranha. He didn't make any new effects because Roger was also noted for being the one producer in all of Hollywood who never lost money on a movie, which he also would downplay and say, actually, that is not true. I did lose money on one movie, and that was The Intruder with William Shatner, where he played a white supremacist. And it was like his one, Corbin's one, like really serious social drama movie, and he lost money on that. But yeah, so what we have here, Kevin, is I think one of the two main crown jewels of what's called the Poe cycle.
Yes.
And I think most people like myself, I kind of debate as to which one is the best. There's 8 of these movies, 7 of which star Vincent Price.
Was it 7 really? Holy shit! Yeah. It never occurred to me that Vincent Price starred in 7 of them.
Yeah, the only one he did not star in was Premature Burial, and that was because of a scheduling conflict.
I didn't know that. I knew he wasn't in that one because I like that one. But oh wow, okay.
Yeah, placed him with Ray Milland, and honestly, if the fact and unless you are a diehard fan of X, the Man with the X-ray eyes, you realize that Ray Milland is not as great as an actor as Vincent Price was. Although X, the Man with the X-ray eyes is a very good movie. I did see it not too long ago, but he just doesn't have the charisma of Vincent Price. I think Premature Burial probably would have been much more well remembered if Vincent Price had been in it. But yeah, I mean, so Roger Corman's main thing, I think he is when those Poe films, I think, and all of his films, I think, prove the exception to the rule. You know, the thing where it says if you want something good, you can do it fast but not cheap, or you can do it cheap and not fast, or something like that. You can do fast, cheap, but you can't have both. Well, he made a lot of movies that were good and fast and cheap.
He did. Now the ratio may be small, but the ones that he did that were really, really well done, and they were also fast and very cheap. But he was really good at doing that. I think if I'm not mistaken, some of his best remembered films are the few that he actually directed. Which did he direct all 8 of the Poe movies? For some reason I can't. Okay, see that's why I kept thinking, but I didn't want to say it out of turn if I wasn't 100% sure. And
you're not wrong. I was confused too. I really was, because I could swear that Jacques Tourneur did a couple of them, and yes, but none of them were Poe. Like Jacques Tourneur did Comedy of Terrors. And he did one other movie I can't remember that is like Poe adjacent but isn't really Poe. But no, yeah, Corman did all 8 of them, and they are fall of their. Well, first of all, he pitched this cycle to his like. This is by the way mind blowing that you would pitch a cycle of 8 projects to your producer. But that's what he did. So Samuel J. Arkoff was the head of American International Pictures, which is where Corman was making movies at the time. And he had this idea that he would do 8 movies of Edgar Allan Poe stuff, because it's hard to imagine this, Kevin, but at the time, Poe's work was not very well known outside of the classroom. Everybody's English class, including my own, was exposed to Poe. So that was his idea, that he loved Poe so much, and he knew that because everybody was being forced to read his books and stories in English classes, everybody would know the name. So, I mean, aside from, I think there was a version of The Raven with Bela Lugosi way back in the 40s. There really weren't that many Poe adaptations. Oh, that's not true. There was also one other version of Fall of the House of Usher that was made back in the 30s. And I cannot remember the director of that. I just know that Louise Bernal was involved somehow, which is very strange. But these 8 are Fall of the House of Usher, which is, again, Corman always cutting costs, so he shortened the title to House of Usher. Pit and the Pendulum, again, he saved money by dropping the. So it's not The Pit and the Pendulum, it's Pit and the Pendulum, which many people say is probably the best of them.
That's my favorite.
Yeah, we'll talk about why that one is probably the best maybe next time we meet. Let's see. So yeah, the Pit and the Pendulum, and then after that came He was going to do Mask the Red Death, but he saw Ingmar Bergman's The Seventh Seal coming out and said, "Oops, that's a little too similar to what we got going on with this." So instead, I'll do Premature Burial, Tomb of Lygia, and The Raven, which isn't really a horror movie; it's a comedy.
Comedy.
Yeah.
Great cast, though. Great cast.
Freaking great cast. Oh yeah. And Tomb of Lygia is actually really cool because it's very artsy and dreamy. I don't know what it is about Tomb of Lygia that I like so much, and maybe it has to do also with Vincent Price's iconic look in that movie. Oh yeah, and of course the Haunted Palace, which is considered a Poe movie, but not really, because it's actually an H.P. Lovecraft short story. But the title comes from Poe. And then, of course, the one anthology film in the bunch, which was Tales of Terror.
Yep.
Which includes his version of the Black Cat, because every freaking director has done a version of the Black Cat at some point.
The most produced of all of Poe's films is the freaking Black Cat.
Yes.
Oh my God.
For sure. Yeah. But yeah, like you mentioned, he was also, doing all these kinds of things made him put him in the place to give up and coming actors and cinematographers, and because a lot of people who became great directors and stuff were people on his crew, and this movie's no different. Cinematographer Nicholas Roeg, who went on to do Don't Look Now.
Yep.
And Man Who Fell to Earth.
That's right. He did that. I forgot about that one.
Yes. Yeah. And, obviously, for those who don't know, I mean, the list goes on to the people whose lives he touched and careers that he started. Jack Nicholson, Robert De Niro, Ron Howard, Martin Scorsese. None of these people are in this movie, but yes, they're all there. But like you said, Vincent Price, I think his legend would not loom as large if it weren't for these 8, well, in his case, 7 Poe movies. Because this is the thing I think that cements Vincent Price as the horror icon of the 20th century. Which is funny because, I'm a huge Vincent Price fan, probably because of Michael Jackson's Thriller and maybe the 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo. I think that's what started me on that. But now I'm like a huge Vincent Price fan. But now I think a lot of people are, because NECA Action Figures is now doing a Vincent Price doll. And what I love about it is his accessories. He has a skull, a black cat, a raven, and he sits on a big throne chair. Oh, and he has a cigarette. You imagine that.
Is this the Edgar Allan Poe one?
Yeah, well, it's it's just an action figure of Vincent Price, the man.
Okay.
And just so you can have it. I think that's why he's so iconic. He's iconic not just for any of the parts that he played. Like Bela Lugosi is iconic because of Dracula, but Vincent Price is iconic for being Vincent Price.
You know what? I will agree with you on that, because it doesn't matter what film he was in. Vincent Price is like he's almost the only other equivalent I can think of in horror would be Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee is Christopher Lee. Vincent Price is Vincent Price. Bela Lugosi was Dracula. I guarantee you, most people who think of Bela Lugosi is not going to think of any other film Bela Lugosi was ever in except for Dracula.
You're right. They can't. I mean, I struggled to think of. Oh yeah, he did a version of The Raven too. I forgot about that. And just like Price's version, the Bela Lugosi, The Raven, has absolutely nothing to do with that poem.
Jesus.
But yeah, really. But so this is like one of the cinema's great collaborations. Is Roger and Vincent Price. But he also collaborated on this movie with 2 great writers. One who's a whole lot greater than the other one. Not to say anything bad about this guy, who's probably dead. Mr. J. Campbell, whose last name I can't remember. But he was a writer of many, many Westerns. The co-writer on this movie was Charles Beaumont, Those of you out there who don't know that name, Charles Beaumont was a writer of many, many classic Twilight Zone episodes.
I was say I know that name for some reason, and it would be because of Twilight Zone because I've seen like every episode of Twilight Zone.
So he wrote several classic ones, including the one featured in this book of selected stories that I've got in my hand right here. You people at home can't see. It's called Perchance to Dream and Selected Stories. Perchance to Dream, the one where the guy's going to a psychiatrist's office and he's like, Doc, you got to help me. Every time I fall asleep, there's this crazy woman who's trying to get me to go on this roller coaster. I'm afraid if I go on with her, I'm going to die. And of course, twist. But he did that. He did several other. Oh, he did The Howling Man, the one where the guy goes to the monastery and the monks are saying they got the devil locked up in a room. Don't ever go there. And of course he does. In His Image, which is one of the first stories about a main protagonist who thinks he's human and turns out to be an android. He did all kinds of other great short stories, and sadly, Charles Beaumont died very young of cancer. I think he was only like 40. Yeah, for some weird reason, a lot of the Twilight Zone writers, including Rod Serling, they died young. None of them really reached none of them reached their late 60s.
Oh shit, that's sad to hear. Okay.
Yeah, it's weird. But we're going to be talking about death a lot on this episode because Masque of the Red Death.
Yes. So, what was some of your first impressions of watching this movie?
Oh my goodness. I had to really rack my brain to figure out when. I can't remember when I watched this movie for the first time. I know it had to have taken place because obviously, but I think I could not remember for the life of me if I had seen the movie first or read the short story in high school first. I want to say that I read the short story in high school first. And I remember being very upset that my fellow students weren't getting what Poe was saying in the story. And I was like upset. I felt like I was the only freaking person in the class who got it. And I was falling in love with Poe and everyone else hated him. And I was like, ugh. I realized then I was different. And also, I must have at that time, around that same time in the late 90s, I think I also saw Werner Herzog's Nosferatu,
Okay.
which, by the way, we also need to put on the list because that movie's amazing. And when I saw that, I think on some premium cable channel called Flix, that's when I realized, a vision in my head came of what I had hoped one day to be my version of Master of Red Death would look and feel like. It would be like a weird kind of dreamy Herzogian version of the story that was a little bit more faithful than what Corman did, although it mutated a little bit over the years to become almost like this sci-fi dystopian thing. So immediately, though, I was so taken with Corman's version and taken with Bryce that I decided I had to record this off of TV. So, of course, I had here.
Wow.
If you can't see it at home, this is a VHS tape that I made. And I think our Monster Squad episode, I mentioned that my mother was a huge proponent of semi-illegally recording movies off of HBO and stuff and making these random triple features. Well, when I was old enough to do that myself, I guess I ended up doing the same daggum thing because I got these random triple features. This one has Masque of the Red Death, Gallipoli with Mel Gibson, and Westworld, Michael Crichton's seminal sci-fi western thriller Westworld.
Okay.
So that's random.
That is, but it's VHS. Back then, we just recorded whatever we wanted to on each one of the tapes. That being said, you know what? I was one of those people who really didn't get Poe in high school. It took a lot of dissecting Poe for me to actually get Poe. And I didn't watch this originally until what was it? Shout Factory did the box set, and I liked Vincent Price, so I purchased the box set, and I saw this for the first time when I had the box set. I became a huge Vincent Price fan after seeing this film and the the Elijah, the Elijah and Follow House Usher. Those are the three I've seen more often than I probably should have. But I recently watched this one maybe a couple of years back again when I did my Hazel Court tribute weekend. And I got to re-enjoy this movie again, and it's still one of my favorite movies that Price did. In addition to, of course, Witchfinder General, which I think is one of my favorite performances that he ever did. Uh, I think the concept of this film in which Vincent Price plays this person who can do no wrong and decides to shirk the warnings that he's told beforehand and hold like the greatest party known to mankind with all the richest people in the area. I think that concept, even though it's something similar has been used more often than you would think in terms of referencing the rich versus the poor. But I just love Vincent Price in the role. Like
Yeah,
he's
like he's a bit more subtle than some of his more villainous roles,
yeah,
and oddly sympathetic at times. Even though this movie opens with making him seem like he is just the most evil
mm.
motherfucker you've ever met, because he literally almost runs over an infant child in the street with his carriage.
Like that's how you
It's
start the movie.
that's
Vincent Price is he's about to run over a child and doesn't even care. I was like,
yeah, no, he doesn't. He doesn't. He never even knows that thing that baby even exists. And
what?
like that openings, the whole opening of this movie goes so hard, and like I also love the kind of the prologue before it, because this is kind of where Roger Corman really tried to cement his place as an auteur. You
Hmm.
know, he tried to, there's great compositions in it, which is why I'm glad I finally got to see the this movie on Blu-ray on widescreen, because the version that I had on this wonderful VHS is not the full version. It was truncated. It was switched to 4:3, and it looked kind of blurry at times. I didn't understand why, and now I know, because sometimes it's stretched, especially the end credits, weirdly. So thank God we now have his full vision. But like that first shot with the woman just kind of picking little bits of wood in this foggy black forest, just pick, 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 and then all of a sudden you see this red hooded figure sitting on a tree playing with tarot cards and telling her, come, child, here, tell your villagers that your redemption is at hand.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see why that Corman probably thought, oh yeah, it's a wee bit seven seal-y.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that.
So yeah, by the way, for those of you at home who don't know, The Seventh Seal is the Swedish Ingmar Bergman movie where Max von Sydow is a knight who plays chess with death and talks about God a lot. Um, and this is the movie where Vincent Price parties with death and talks about God a lot. Uh, in fact, I think they talk about God more in this movie than they do in Seventh Seal. But we'll get to that in due time. But yeah, so we slam cut from that little quiet open to where Vincent Price just comes in and he's tearing through his village just to announce. Well, first of all, he comes like he's basically does the whole manager thing. Basically, he's like, I came here to thank all of you for a bountiful harvest this year. And then Gino, our sort of leading man, is like, oh, so you can starve us the rest of the year. And oh gosh, I wrote it down because he notices Gino, and basically, what was it? Oh right, it's interesting too. Okay, so he's basically like trying to call Vincent Price on his BS, and he's like, "No, yes, yeah, I get it. I'm a bastard. I know it. I don't care." Which is it's almost Trumpian of him, where it's just like he's so like open about his evil and his bastardness, but
Yeah,
he's honest about it, and he thinks that his honesty is a virtue.
he does.
And
Yeah,
yeah, and it's like truth and honesty is a virtue that he thinks kind of trumps everything. Pun intended. I think that's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I lost the quote. It was so
Yeah.
snazzy. It's kind of also Vincent Price is kind of also the master of like the snarky comebacks and the ghoulish kind of one-liners when somebody is killed either by him or indirectly by him.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the thing is that his character he assumes everybody will do what the hell he tells him to do. And it's how he puts himself in the position that he is in this movie. Um you kind of wonder why you weren't invited to the party, because it seemed like it'd be a great party if you whether you were rich or not. I'm trying to
Well,
remember.
he doesn't. I mean, he does technically invite the poorers. He says, he's like, you're all invited to the safety of my castle, and then Gino, the guy, is like, so you can throw your food from your table. And he's like, exactly. He just says, yes, exactly, like a
Yeah,
boss.
I had forgotten about that. You're absolutely right. That's right. He does.
But then he gets offended and tries to kill Gino and his dad, and that's when Jane Asher shows up. Our heroine, Francesca. I'm just gonna call her Jane Asher because it's easier to say than Francesca.
Yeah.
But Jane Asher, who was Paul McCartney's girlfriend at the time.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah, he came to the set one day.
Oh,
Like
shit.
Paul McCartney came to the set because Jane Asher was dating him. I'm not sure it was during her bathtub scene. That would have been awkward. But but at some point we'll talk about that later because that scene is so funny. Uh, so like Paul McCartney just shows up and he's gonna have a gig with the Beatles the next day, and Roger Corman did not know who Paul McCartney was, and he just like there's like, oh, it's like, good luck on your concert tomorrow, young man.
Oh, well, he was too busy trying to deal with Vincent Price's personality to deal with John McCartney's personality. Oh my God. That's interesting. I never knew that. Never knew that at all.
Well,
Okay.
I mean, Corman was such a square. He probably genuinely did not know who the Beatles were. And remember, this is 1963 when they were filming this.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. This is a 60s film, everyone out there. Despite the fact that Roger Corman did films in like virtually every decade, this is still 60s. Way ahead of his time. 60s. So
Oh yeah. And speaking of Price, the way he delivers lines, like there's that, and that's another thing I noticed when I rewatched this movie is how he Vincent Price was like a classically trained actor.
mhm.
I used to think he was British for a long time. Then I realized no, he's American. He's as American as apple pie. But or he was Canadian because he played a Canadian, The Fly, and he is not Canadian. But his classical training, I think, shows through in this movie in this particular scene when Jane Asher is begging for the life of her leather and her father,
Mhm.
and and he's and his guards are trying to throw her away, and he turns her and she's like, in the name of God, please, and he turns around and says, "Stop! She was addressing me." And the way that he says "me" right after she says "in the name of God" is just something like only a classically trained actor would do. Knowing the theme and the emotional arc of his character, he decided to put the emphasis on me, and he said it in such a way that it leaves you wondering: was he literally saying that he's God? In the name of God, she was addressing me, and I think he meant for it to suggest that because um, there's a quote that I found from Roger Corman on a like a fairly recent one actually from the 2020s, where they were talking about what Vincent Price's approach to this role was and how they kind of together figured out the character, and it's fascinating. So basically, he said that Vincent Price's approach to the role was of a educated, proud noble, and Corman told him that his whole thing is that he thinks God is dead. And since he can do anything he wants, he can get away with anything. And if he wants to replace God with Satan, he can. And Prospero is man's need to have something controlling the universe, just as long as it's not the Christian God. It can be an evil God, i.e., Satan, as long as he can do whatever he wants. But of course, and this pretty much ends Corman's quote. I add, but of course, as the Red Death shows him, I think at the end of the movie, we're jumping ahead a little bit, but I think Satan is not really Prospero's God. I think Prospero's real God is himself. And I think spoilers, that's part of the reason why the Red Death's true face underneath the hood is Prospero's face.
Interesting. I didn't think about that.
Because his real God is himself, and that is a very fragile God indeed.
See, yeah, I like it. I like that theory. I like that thinking. That's very interesting. When I rewatch it again, I'll have to keep in mind that. That's very interesting.
Yeah. And it's also, and if you think about it, that's also kind of an idea that's keeping in step with LaVeyan Satanism, which clearly this is kind of what this is the kind of Satanism that Prospero's character practices, even though it did not exist in the Middle Ages. Super anachronistic. Those who don't know, Anton LaVey, the founder of modern Satanism, he lived right around the turn of the century, and his whole thing was like, you ask any priest of the Church of Satan, they'll say that when they're saying "Hail Satan," what they're really saying is "Hail me." So any good Satanist really has themselves as the center of their universe, of their moral universe. And just like Vincent Price is, when he's talking about Satan with Jane Asher, he's saying how, like, Satan is not a god of hate, he says, or a god of death. He's a god of truth. He's all about truth, or what he thinks is truth. So anyway, we'll get more into that as we get into it. But like I said, this whole beginning sets up so much in so little time.
Yeah.
You have character, you have theme, you have mood, you have deep theological ideas, all just right there in barely 10 minutes. And we're off and running because the thing that propels the plot forward, aside from he just drops in saying, "Hey, I'm going to have a party," is that he goes to a hut and discovers, oh crap, that old lady in the beginning of the movie, she has the Red Death and she is dying. So that's it. Scorched earth, the entire village. Everyone's going with me. So he picks up Jane Asher, picks up her father and her lover, Geo, and steers them all to his castle while he burns the village to the ground, like any good noble would do if you found out that the plague was in your village.
Well, that's a very striking beginning for this movie, probably of any horror movie of the 60s. The Prospero's character, the fact that a child almost gets ran over, the guy pretty much says, "Oh, this village is going to die because she's got the plague, burn it to the ground." And I'm like, man, Roger Corman was not playing when he did. Yeah, this was unlike, in my opinion, this was unlike a lot of his other films that he had produced prior to this. Because he one of the reasons why, because he suggested doing this post cycle of films. The other thing is he was so well known for just going with the current trend when he was producing movies. It just seemed so out of place for all of that. So,
oh yeah, well, you can tell that he was very much influenced by guys like Bergman, and that's why he didn't want to do this movie immediately after Usher. He respected Bergman enough that he decided he was going to wait and do Premature Burial and Pit the Pendulum next, so that he could put some distance between that and him. And he also wanted this, but I think this is the reason why he wanted to do the second. Like House of Usher was the showpiece that has got all the spook house kind of elements to it. Like this was the commercialish one. And I feel like Masque of Death was supposed to be like the one for him. This was the artier one. And that's why there's so much kind of Bergman in it. Fun fact, by the way, like we know that he's a huge fan of Bergman, but in the late 70s, Ingmar Bergman did not have, he fell on hard times financially. And Roger Corman's New World Pictures bought the rights to the foreign distribution rights to Cries and Whispers, Bergman's movie, and he dubbed it in English and played it in drive-ins all across the country. And this big, serious, like almost 3 hour Swedish drama played in drive-ins, and it was a huge hit. In fact, it was Bergman's biggest hit. And also his first Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film, and all because of Roger Corman. So again, no person has been not touched in some way by Roger Corman. Even as a distribution producer, he was a genius. Like, who would have thought put a Swedish movie in drive-ins? I wonder what double features you could have put on with Cries and Whispers in the late 70s. It'd have been really weird.
It probably would have been really weird. I would love to have sat down with Roger Corman and figured out what was going through his producer brain when he did half the things that he fucking did. Some of it was genius. Some of it was a what the fuck. And the other one was like, oh, this is obvious. He's just following a trend because it's trending right now. He can make lots of money real quickly before going on to something else. But you're right. With these Poe films, he took his time, which is testament to how much these endure, as opposed to some of the other films that he produced, especially the ones from some of his blaxploitation movies, his women in prison movies, the nurse movies, that whole trend when it went for like 3-4 years, all the movies he did there. No one remembers those, but they definitely remember his fucking Poe movies.
And of course his Alien ripoffs.
And his Alien ripoffs, and there were a lot of those too.
Oh yes. But I feel like what was I gonna say? Oh, I just lost my train of thought. So let's move on to what I think is one of the funnier moments of this movie is the baths. Okay. Literally, Jane Asher gets thrown into the water naked in this bath, and she tries to cover herself. And what I find hilarious about it is she has this long conversation with Vincent Price and Hazel Court, who, by the way, is basically his girlfriend. But maybe not. There's no doubt in my mind that he has had some kind of intercourse with her sexually, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
But she's more his disciple in the ways of Satan, and she's all about doing the ritual, the Black Mass, and ascending to the highest level of Satanness, which is a thing apparently. So there's a little bit of jealousy between her and Jane Asher's character, but not as much as I remembered. Because there's a point later on where Hazel Court's character starts to actually try to help Jane Asher escape, and just like straight up just gives her a key. Here, take your men and get out of here. It doesn't work, but she does it. It's just kind of funny. That's like the extent of their conflict. There's a couple of terse moments between that, and that's it.
I kind of saw it like you did, where I was like, what is Hazel Court and Vincent Price's character, Prospero's relationship with one another? It seems so odd. And then you think that there would be a lot more antagonism between her and Asher's character, which I can't, I'm like you, I can't remember her name to save my life. I know the actress's name, but I forget the character's name. You'd think there'd be a little bit more because these are the two main actresses in this movie. And for some of us, I'm a huge Hazel Court fan. And like I said, I did a tribute weekend based on her because I fucking grew up watching her movies. So doing this whole thing, I gravitated towards her a lot in the movie, and I saw her as a kind of a disciple following behind him. And so
yeah. So where do you think this ranks in her like pantheon of performances? Like, is this pretty high up there, or like mid-tier, or what? Where do you think, like, because I don't think I've seen that many other of her movies just yet.
For me, it's in the middle, mostly because she has other films where she's more prominently featured. The thing about this movie is I see this as a Vincent Price movie.
Mm.
So I don't see it so much as a Hazel Court movie as a Hazel Court just co-stars in the movie. She does an excellent job, but it's not like one of those the one like I don't think she's required to give that great finest performance that made. I think the thing is she has such a weird legacy that this is always pops up because it's one of the most popular ones. I
That's
think
true.
that,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is
What would you say, what would you say is like the one thing? Like if you're gonna say this is the if you're gonna get into Hazel Court, this is what you need to see first. What would be that thing?
you know what? I'd have to think about that again because it's been a while since I watched all of those for my tribute weekend.
If
Um,
uh,
yeah, because I did it a few years back, and when everything's fresh in your brain, haven't seen all of her films in like the course of 2 days, it was it's kind of daunting. It's the reason why I haven't done Vincent Price tribute weekend yet. It's because there's so many damn movies.
Art.
I kept telling myself when I do a Bela Lugosi one again, I have because I didn't touch upon some of his most famous ones when I did Bela Lugosi, not Bela Lugosi, but yeah, Bela Lugosi, Bela Lugosi. I'd have to do a second one just to catch up on all the other ones. The thing is, go
I think
ahead.
I was more familiar with her as a Hammer Studios
That
kind
is
of.
exactly.
Yeah, because she was Mrs. Frankenstein in Curse of Frankenstein. She was Elizabeth in that movie with Peter Cushing, and she also did a couple more Poe films with Roger Corman, namely The Raven and The Premature Bear.
Yep.
That's the only other things that I know of.
I think I did I lose track because I've done several tribute weekends, and so I don't really redo movies I've already done with one other actor. But I think with Premature Burial, I did it with someone else, and I didn't do it with her, or it may have been The Raven. I lose track. And there are some films I just didn't touch because unfortunately for the tribute weekends, if you're not familiar with those, because you're listening to this podcast, tribute weekends are designed so that anyone can go online and watch the older films that are readily available on YouTube or anywhere else because of free domain. If they're not free domain, I try to stay away from them, mostly because I can't put them on YouTube if they're not in the public domain. Therefore, you won't be able to watch the episode that highlights them. That's the whole point of doing the tribute weekend is to allow people to see older movies that haven't been seen nearly as much. The Masque of the Red Death is readily available on YouTube anywhere, or at least the cut version of it. Probably the 4-3. I do not remember when I saw this. I do believe the version I screened was a 16:9 on YouTube, but it wasn't like the highest quality.
Oh, that's sad. So apparently, thinking of Hazel Court before we move on to in the scene because there's a lot more to talk about just in this scene, but because there's so very much. But Hazel Court apparently there's a sweet little anecdote about her making this movie that I remember reading. She said that they all had a great time shooting this movie right up until like the middle of filming. JFK was shot, and they heard about it. And the day that they heard about it, Roger Corman just closed the set and everyone went home, which which was England because this was like the first movie that Roger Corman shot in England because he was trying to take advantage of the tax breaks that were going on there. And of course, all these free castle sets that were left over from a movie called Beckett. And if you don't know what that is, Google it. But anyway, so JFK gets assassinated and everyone is just like solemn and they all just want to go home to be with their families. And the whole crew is British. And I think the only other American person aside from Roger on the set was Vincent Price. And Vincent Price told Hazel Court the next day when they were finally back on set, he said, I never felt more far away from home than I was yesterday.
Mm.
So, yeah, that was kind of sad. Anyway, so yeah, Hazel Court had a really interesting life, and she died in 2008 at the age of 82.
Yep.
Dang. So
yeah, that was one of the reasons why I did that. I was trying to capture some of the actors and actresses that have passed away. Most of our tribute weekends are based on actors and actresses or directors because we did one of Edward D. Wood Jr. too, who have passed. And the thing is that we want to highlight some of those amazing talents that have been forgotten over time.
Oh yeah, they shouldn't be forgotten for sure. So in
Go
this scene,
back.
like, she's in the bath and talking with Naked and talking with Vincent Price. And he's like, that cross on your neck, do you wear it for decoration or are you a true believer? And she says, yeah, I am a true believer. And he's like, well, take it off and give it to me. Because he's like, I won't see it, I won't look at it. And she's like, okay, takes it off. But what I think is hilarious is that, like, shortly after these little bits of dialogue, she gets up and they put a towel around her and everything, but she hasn't been bathed. There were attendants there, but the moment she gets thrown in, Prospero comes in and dismisses them. So she doesn't really have a bath. She's just like, she was dirty before, and now she's dirty and wet. They don't wash her hair. They don't do anything to her. And to me, it's like one of those hilarious things that's like in movies where people sit down to eat and they never actually eat, or they order something and they never actually partake. That's one of those things, and it just like was hilarious to me watching it. I was like, oh, they don't really improve her very much. They just drop her in there, assume it's like, hit the water, you are now clean. I don't know why.
Thomas, the things that you bring up are like, Jesus.
I mean, come on, am I wrong? Watch it again. She never actually gets clean. She's just as dirty as she leaves that tub as she got in.
Yeah, it's a film thing, and when you bring it up, it's hilarious because back then that happened all the time. People don't do it nearly as much now because we just cut, we just do cuts all the time. But
Yeah.
you're right. You're absolutely right.
So from there, though, we go to meet Prospero's 1,000 friends, as they're called in the story, the party goers. And Vincent Price has this nice little speech about what terror is. He says, is it the silence of knowing the passage of time, or the failing beat of your own heart, or the sound of someone who you sure wasn't there before? And of course, I'm doing a terrible disservice to him, but that whole monologue was just delightful, and it's one of the highlights of the movie. It also goes to this one bit of prop or set dressing. Yeah, set dressing, because nobody actually touches it. Is the big old grandfather clock in this movie that has a pendulum swinging that looks like an axe, which of course I'm sure is like vaguely reminiscent of the pendulum. That daggum clock has a much bigger part in the short story. Because in the short story, whenever that grandfather clock, which is actually in the black room, which in a little bit we're going to talk about the different colored rooms and why that's a thing in this movie, in Prospero's castle, that clock is supposed to be in the black room, in the scariest, deepest, darkest part of the room. But the rooms are much bigger, and when the clock, every time it strikes the hour, every time it goes bong, the musicians stop, the party stops, and everyone just listens until the clock stops striking the hour, and then presumes they're merrymaking. So there's this constant like encroachment of the passage of time.
Yeah,
a huge thing in the story. So I'm a little sad they didn't do that in this, in a way. And it could have made for an interesting kind of thematic motif. Yeah, visual motif. Yeah, like a thematic thing, a structure thing. There's they could have used a bit more structure, but I do think there is some structure. But yeah, it was interesting how, and so here then is the rooms, because very shortly after that we get a tour. Francesca Jane Astor gets a tour of the different colored rooms.
Yes.
Now, in the story, there's 7 of them. In this movie, I'm pretty sure there's only like 6 or 5.
I think there's 5. But I'd have to rewatch to remember it again. But you're right.
Because I think maybe Corey again was saving money. Because there's the yellow room, which he said was basically a torture room where he locked somebody in there, and then for like several days, and by the time he came out, he could never look at the sun or like anything yellow, even like a sunflower, or he could never look at it again because he was so traumatized by being in the yellow room.
Mm.
And what's funny is like each of these rooms, their furnishings are pretty much the same, except for there's one little window, which that is in the story. I'll grant you. I'll give you props for that, Roger Corman. There's like one window in these little rooms, but everything is just that one color, that whatever the color is. If it's the yellow room, the chair's yellow. Everything is bright friggin' yellow. And then the next one I think was blue or purple. I went back and actually reread the short story and friggin' wrote it all down because it's interesting. And then they just go, okay, here you go. Yeah. So in the story, it's first one is blue, not yellow. There's not even a room in the original short story. There's an orange room, but it starts with blue, purple, green, orange, white, then violet, and then the seventh room is the black room, which is the same in the movie. And also the black room has that one red stained glass window.
Yeah.
Just like in the movie. They did get that right. The only thing that is radically different, aside from the fact that there's not 7 rooms, and the colors are way different, or the order is not correct, is the fact that in the short story, the rooms are so big that people dance inside them and have orgies inside them. So the rooms are integrated into the castle. They're not in one neat row like they are in the movie.
Oh, interesting. I did not have a clue.
And actually, I don't want to be the actually guy, but I'll be the and actually guy. And actually, I don't know if you remember this, but like Dario Argento's Suspiria borrows that exact same motif. Except I think he's a little bit more faithful to the order of Poe. There is a white room, there is a blue room. The blue room is the pool room that they all swim in Suspiria. The original Suspiria, not the remake. And just like in Masque of the Red Death, the final room where Helena Marcus the witch is black. Is the black room. And so so there is this kind of this Poe connection between this movie and Suspiria.
Okay, I did not even think about that at all. That's very interesting that you bring that up, especially considering how many times I've seen Suspiria. I've never took that into consideration.
Oh yeah, it kind of I didn't really. He's not very overt about it, Dario Argento, but the moment that I started watching it like for the third time, I was like, wait a minute. and I think I'd seen Masque of the Red Death not too long ago before that, and I was like, that's what they're doing. I can't, and also I cannot, I can't elaborate on this, but because I can't figure out exactly why I think this, but I have a weird feeling that I feel like these rooms that's presented in this movie are supposed to represent Prospero's psyche.
Huh.
I can't explain it, but I got a gut feeling. Especially because, okay, I think maybe this is, okay, I think it's coming to me now. I am now figuring it out. Okay, here's why I think it is. The first time he shows her all the rooms, starting from the yellow all the way to the black.
Uh-huh.
But he says, you can't go in the black room. I'm sorry, you can't go in there. So I think the black room is his subconscious. Like, I don't know. This is very early in their relationship. He's like, I don't trust you enough yet. You're not ready for what's in there. And now structurally, of course, for a horror movie, that creates mystery and suspense.
Yeah.
And we all what's in that freaking black room. And then later on, Hazel Court, not Hazel Court, but Jane Asher is in her bedroom and wakes up. And there's this really weird, terrifying, like legit scary, because I was going to say, there, audience, there's some pretty good jump scares in this movie made in 1964. I'm just going to put that out there. So if you like jump scares, you're going to be surprised and find some good stuff in this movie, by the way.
Yeah, there's a lot of them in this movie.
Yeah. So, like, she gets out of her bed. It's late at night. She hears some weird sounds, finds some blood on her nightstand for reasons that are never explained. And then it goes through a secret passageway, hears Hazel Court intoning the Black Mass, and follows her voice and somehow gets into the black room, finds Hazel Court sitting there in a trance, and then on this like coffin question mark type thing on the ground is, we think, Vincent Price dead. Prospero dressed up as, I guess, like a judge or something, but he looks pale and just dead. And she looks at him, and all of a sudden, his eyes open. And friggin' Jane Asher just like freaks out, runs, goes back to her room, wakes up the next morning, and she's like, I had a very strange dream. And there is no explanation for what happened. Prospero doesn't say, oh, that was just blah, blah, blah. He never does. Never explains it. We have no idea what the heck happened that night. So it could very well be, I feel like, that dead version of himself is his subconscious self. And she arouses it in him. And that basically anything good he does in this movie is somewhat motivated by her in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
I think. So
it is. Like, she represents, I guess you would say, almost like a better half, even though she's a follower. But it's like almost like his conscience. He has to have that character that tells him those type of things in the film. Just pain. I wouldn't say pain in the ass, but he'd just be an asshole, I guess.
Oh yeah, colossal. Yeah. So yeah. Oh, also another fun fact. Speaking of the rooms and the colors and everything, I don't know. Did you watch Mike Flanagan's Fall of the House of Usher series?
I have not yet, and everyone keeps picking on me for having not seen it yet. I have not seen it yet. Leave me alone.
Okay. Well, you're in for a treat, because Flanagan also he doesn't just do Fall of the House of Usher. He does like almost all the big Poe stories and interweaves them in the story of this family, of the Usher family. They all die in like Poe related deaths.
Oh, really? No one told me this. Oh, wow.
Like the first one, and also they're all color coordinated to the different colored rooms in Masque of the Red Death. Like the first family member, her whole thing is she lives in a white world. Her room is all white, and then she goes to it's a really complicated plot having to do with the opioid crisis. But anyway, she tries to expose her father, and goes to like one of her labs, and there's a chimp in the lab. And lo and behold, the chimp has a razor blade and, spoilers, kills her with the razor blade, which of course is Murders in the Rue Morgue. Spoilers for that 100-year-old short story, but that was the first detective story in which the chimp did it.
Yeah. Interesting. I didn't know that.
But each character is color coded to their personality, and like the green room, like the green Tamerlane is the daughter who's like sick, or she has some kind of mental and physical kind of illness. Her death is lit green, and it's amazing. You gotta see it. It's a great show.
Well, I haven't seen that or Midnight Mass. Those are the only two Mike Flanagan things I have not watched. Those are on my list, and they're very high up on my list. I haven't gotten to them just yet.
Yeah, I haven't gotten to Midnight Mass either. I avoided it because it looked so long. that was why I still haven't freaking finished Haunting of Hill House.
Oh wow, that's brilliant.
But you know what? It was funny is like I thought I would have that problem with Fall of the House of Usher. I did not. I finished that sucker in 3 days.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, even though it's not as long. It doesn't feel as long. It goes by at a brisk pace. But his version of Masque of the Red Death, this modern version interpretation of it, is probably, I think, the best we're gonna get in terms of a modern remake of this movie for a very, very long time.
Okay.
Unfortunately, well, for better or worse. So I guess you could just and it's episode 2, so you don't have to wait very long for it to happen. But yeah, so the multicolored room, the colors meaning something, the rooms, all that stuff is a motif that just runs through the DNA of this movie and others that have gone on after it. So like, and also like I said, we mentioned the Black Mask. Later on, you'll see more of the Black Mask when Hazel Court actually finally consummates her relationship with Satan. Um, but I'll tell you this though, it's that if you really want an accurate depiction of the Black Mask, don't look to this movie. Watch The Devil's Reign with Ernest Borgnine instead. That movie is an accurate depiction of the Black Mask because they actually had real Satanists consult on that movie.
I did not know that. I have seen that one though. I did not know that though.
Yeah, it's true. I think Anton Xander LaVey was still alive when they made that movie, so they had him consult on it.
Oh,
It's kind of
you
yeah,
might.
it's kind
I think I had did read something about that actually. I have to look into that because that one actually should be on our list too. Because I love that movie. I think that's a great movie. That would be a great movie for us to talk about. Okay.
yeah. So yeah, like I said, big WTF. Oh yeah, by the way, another fun fact: guy who directed Devil's Reign also directed The Abominable Dr. Phibes. Another great classic Vincent Price movie. Anyway, Hazel Court tries to escape and has a jump scare with an old guy. They try to escape, and Vincent Price finds them. And he's like, "Tomorrow, one will die for their sins." He's like, "I still remember. Remember, I said I was gonna kill them." Um, and he has this like little game with them where, I forgot to mention also, these movies tend to have not just reoccurring themes, but like reoccurring character motifs. Like he's talking with Jane Asher, but they're strolling along the dungeon talking about who rules the world, because the world is so filled with evil and plague and war. Clearly, a loving Christian God doesn't rule the world, you know. And so then, what does? In that same scene, he mentions like all the dungeon and torture stuff. He's like, "Well, it turns, my ancestor was a Christian monk, and he was one of the higher ups in the Spanish Inquisition, and he used this place to torture people for your God." Which is interesting because that exact same motif was in Bit the Pendulum, where he played a character whose ancestor was a Torquemada type character who tortured people during the Inquisition.
Oh, I didn't notice that either.
Yes.
Well, you probably watched it more recently than I did too.
Yeah, like the day before yesterday. Yeah. So yeah, I just think that's very interesting. So, and then Gino, Asher's boyfriend, not Paul McCartney, but the fake boyfriend, when he finally gets out and he's trying to basically roust the villagers to go to the castle and save, and save Francesca and get into the castle and be safe. I could not help but, I don't know why, but I couldn't help but not think of Monty Python and the Holy Grail and Bring Out Your Dead, because they have this cart full of dead bodies going through what's left of the smoldering medieval village, and all I could hear was, "Bring out your dead! Bring out your dead!"
Some of your observations are Thomas, I tell you.
Thank you. So, and I read somewhere that, and maybe you can help me make sense of this. Like
Okay.
when Hazel Court does give herself to Satan, which is a bit longer in the extended version that I have.
Hmm.
Um, there's like this weird green dream sequence where she's like super stoned. I guess she's like burned an upside down cross into her boob, and takes some absinthe, I think, and then gets on this slab, and it is said that this is a quote unquote Rosemary's Baby-esque scene before Rosemary's Baby was made. Maybe part of my confusion is that I haven't actually seen all of Rosemary's Baby, but I think I know what they're talking about. I think they're drawing parallels between this scene and the scene where in Rosemary's Baby, where Satan actually, has her way with poor Rosemary and conceives the Antichrist.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I would agree with you on that one. I never even thought about that till now. I could see that as a one hell of a parallel and why people would see that. Yeah.
What's
Uh,
funny though, like you don't even see any kind of avatar of Satan in that whole thing. It's just like a weird parade of different priests of different religions throughout the century waving like blades in front of her, and she screams at them for no apparent reason, but it's
Yeah.
all silent. Like it's just the music, which is cool, but still it's weird and I don't get it.
Well, think of it like this, where Rosemary's Baby is all suggestive until the very, very end when you actually do or don't see the baby at the very end. It could be that these are a bunch of crazy people who are following a made up cult that nothing's really, really crazy. It's all psychological. Keep in mind, Roman Polanski was doing psychological films before he did anything else, with the Tenant and the other one that he's famous for. Shit, can't think of it though. But they're all suggestive, and Rosemary's Baby plays like that for the most part too. Did Satan really, have his way with her? Did he not? There's a lot. The dream sequences, like the one in this one, it functions very similarly because you as the audience is kind of like being kept on the edge of their seats in this type of film where it's Satan, but is it really Satan? What does the Red Death really mean? These are the questions that the film asks because you're presented with a character that you really hate. You've been presented with Vincent Price's Prospero. In Rosemary's Baby, you don't really hate Rosemary's husband, but he is just as bad and vile as Vincent Price because he lets all this shit happen to his wife for what? For monetary gain, be famous. I mean, geez.
Oh, wow.
You make a deal with the devil, and that's essentially rich people do back then. To get one over on all the poor people, they can do whatever they want to because they follow their own rules.
Yeah, maybe you noticed this too. But well, then again, you said you'd only watched it like a couple of years ago, and I watched it fairly recently again. It's interesting to me how I feel like if people watched it today, I think they would feel it's more relevant today than it was even back then, because, and I'll explain that as a roundabout way of talking about the other big subplot of this movie that functions to kind of stretch out the narrative of the middle acts of this movie. Because let's face it, the short story that he's adapting, that Beaumont and company were adapting, is extremely short. It's like 3 pages long. Very little happens in it. It's just basically the last scene of the movie, and that's pretty much it. That's all there is. There's like one line of dialogue. It's basically Prospero saying, "How dare you come in here dressed like that?" Which, by the way, it's funny in the story. It's not that the Red Death wears red that pisses him off so much. It's the fact that the Red Death is dressed up like a bleeding corpse in the middle of his party. Yeah, because in the story, the Red Death is described as being dressed up in bandages, like you would wrap up a corpse, and having a mask that looks like a desiccated, like shrunken, like skull face. Like Lon Chaney's character in the Phantom of the Opera, in the color sequence of the Phantom of the Opera. So, like, if you want to see what it would really look like, Google the Red Death, Barlow's Guide to Fantasy, because in Wayne D. Barlow's book, he illustrated what the character really looks like, and it's pretty disgusting. But anyway, so there is a subplot in this movie where Hop Frog and the Tiny Dancer have this whole like melodrama in the middle and he's a little person, and we are, I think, led to believe that Esmeralda, his dancer, is also a little person, and this is what makes it super disturbing. They cast a literal like 9-year-old child to play Esmeralda, but they dub her voice with like an older 30-year-old woman. So it's kind of like Alia of the Knife in the original David Lynch Dune. So it's that level of weirdness. But what happens is, though, this happens at pretty much towards the beginning of the movie. We're introduced to these two characters. Prospero's like, "Come out and dance for us," He calls him Hop Toad, but his name is Hop Frog in the original story, because this is a whole separate adaptation going on here, where before Mike Flanagan did it, Roger Corman was combining other short stories into this story. And so I think it does fit in the milieu. I'm not sure what it adds to the themes, if anything. But I'm thinking, now that I'm thinking about it, maybe it's more adding to his social commentary of this this kind of clash between the haves and the have-nots, and the corruption of wealth, and the just like blissful ignorance of the super rich, of the poverty, and also the inevitability that it doesn't matter how freaking rich you are, eventually you're going to die, and just like everybody else is. But so Hop Toad, I'm just gonna keep calling him Hop Toad, that's where he is in the movie. But anyway, he clashes with this other guy, not Prospero, but the only other character in this movie who is probably even worse than Prospero. This noble named Alfredo. I don't know why I thought his name was Bernardo when I first saw him, because he looks like a Bernardo. I don't know why. But his name is Alfredo, and he looks at the tiny dancer, and he is like, I can't even say it. He's just, he like desires her, and he's like, I must have her. And it's a freaking child, but it's supposed to be a midget. So I mean, sorry, not midget. That's not. It's a little person, but like, it looks to us like a child. So I think that juxtaposition makes today, I think that would people would watch that and think Epstein Island. And think, I mean, this movie, if you could remake it today with the same script, by just saying, I mean, think about it. What do you have here? You have rich people worshiping Satan, doing black masses, and basically having child molestation parties. Doesn't that sound familiar? So this movie is kind of relevant even today. And
we should definitely screen this for a modern day audience, or give it a re-release.
I'm sorry, but just to be clear, though, ladies and gentlemen out there, nothing happens between Tiny Dancer and Alfredo, except that he slaps her in the face and throws her on the ground. In the short story, it's implied he does other things, but he just slaps her in this one, and basically Hop Toad gets revenge on her behalf by manipulating Alfredo in a very kind of Peter Dinklage-ish sort of way, basically. Like I had that same vibe coming off of him as he was, persuading this guy to dress up like an ape at the party and dance around like an ape. And basically he gets him to get on the chandelier that he lowers and puts this monster in a costume, lights him on fire, and pulls him up into the roof, and just watches him burn to death. Which is what happens in the story. And then he takes Esmeralda away, and they escape. So don't worry, folks. He does get his comeuppance. But yeah, it's wild.
Well, I like what you picked up on, and a lot of people may not realize this from a lot of the Corman's Poe adaptations, as well as a lot of other Corman films, is that he likes to take and incorporate multiple different aspects of Poe's stories, and sometimes not even Poe's stories, as we mentioned earlier, into his films. So watching them, whether a first time or repeated viewing, gives you another layer to the movie that he's trying to present to you. I think, and I didn't think about this now until you mentioned that's one of the assets to this film, is the layering that Corman does in this film, which is absent from a lot of his other films.
Yeah, for sure. I don't remember him. The closest thing, oh no, that wasn't him. That was Stuart Gordon. Because Stuart Gordon did the same kind of thing with his remake of Pit and the Pendulum. He incorporated Cask of Amontillado into his version with Lance Henriksen as Torquemada. and ends up being weirdly a more faithful adaptation of the short story than Corman's version is.
Which is funny because I just watched that like 3 months ago when I bought it.
I mean, it's great. Lance Henriksen's fantastic as always.
Yep.
But yeah. I think I watched that last year on Tubi after I had seen bits and pieces of it on Showtime or Sci-Fi Channel. But yeah, from here on we see so there's that subplot going on, and we just cut back and forth between that and Gino's efforts to try and save Francesca. And all this time, Prospero is basically falling in love with Francesca, and he shows it by trying to corrupt her and trying to instruct her in the ways of Satan and trying to convert her, basically. But she doesn't. She stays steadfast in her Christianity until sort of kind of the end, when she's like, I don't know. And I'm like, hey? It's kind of weird where they leave her character. I'm not entirely certain what her mental state is at the end of this movie. But we know exactly what happens to Hazel Court in this movie. She passes the test, I guess, in that weird green nightmare we mentioned, and wakes up, and there's nobody there. And we have basically our first real kind of almost Dr. Fibesian kill in this movie, where she goes to that clock I mentioned earlier, and hears what she thinks is Vincent Price's voice, doing, I think, bits and pieces of the terror monologue from earlier. And then a freaking raven just comes out of the clock and pecks her to death.
Everyone who gets their comeuppance in this movie, you should know that, and everyone watching this should know that.
Oh yeah, and that whole pecking to death is much longer in the extended cut that I saw. You see a lot of blood. Yeah, oh yeah. They trimmed that because see what happened was I think the extended cut was released in America, but when they went to England, they're like, oh no, we have to trim some things. So they trimmed the black mask. Not the least of which is because the outfit that Hazel Court is wearing in that sequence, she is not wearing anything underneath that. At least the extended cut, you can kind of see everything. So they cut a lot of that out, and then they also cut her getting pecked to death. Primarily, there's just a little bit of it in the final version, but you see it a lot more in the extended cut. And then after she's lying there dead, Vincent Price comes by and finds her, and everyone's like, "Oh, what happened?" And she's like, and Vincent Price has his sickest burn in the entire movie, which is, "Oh, don't mourn her, ladies and gentlemen. She just married a good friend of mine."
Yes, but it's such a great line.
It is such a great line. He's like the master of just those sick, macabre burns. If you want to see a movie which is almost nothing but that, you got to watch Theater of Blood, ladies and gentlemen, which is the movie where he's a Shakespearean actor who kills all his critics.
Oh, gotcha. I had to think about this. I've seen it, but I don't remember what's. And then you mentioned he's the Shakespearean actor. I was like, all the people who commented on his performances.
Yes, everyone gave him bad news. They all die in Shakespeare ways. But yeah, so from there we go to the party itself. This is where we actually get into the Poe-ness of everything, because this is where the story actually goes.
It builds up. It's a lot of build up to this party at the end, but it's such an amazingly choreographed and executed party sequence, or third act sequence.
Right. Oh, wait. Before we go on to that, though, I do want to talk about one other scene, though, that I think is slightly important to the big reveal at the end, which we've already spoiled. But there is a sequence towards the end where some peasants, I think with Gino, try to beg him to get into the castle. And Prospero's like, no. And he tells oh, wait, I'm sorry. It's not this sequence. Although that sequence is important because it shows Prospero being uncharacteristically merciful. He says, kill them, but don't kill the child. So he'll go he's like, don't kill the child. He was going to run over a baby earlier in the movie, but now, because of, I guess, his relationship with Francesca, don't kill the child. So that child stays alive at the end of the movie. But before that, there's another scene where a rich person tries to get into the castle after the party's already started. And yeah, and he's begging Prospero, please let me get in here. I know you loved my wife, but I know you lusted after her. You could have my wife if you just let us in. And he just looks at her with that pencil thin mustache and that snidely, whiplashy kind of look and says, "Oh, I've already had that dubious pleasure." And then what it made me think of is this. I thought earlier before that, he says, I can't let you in because your country is filled with the Red Death. So he's basically saying, I'm almost certain you're infected. You're not coming in here. But then I thought to myself, oh, and he's saying he's already had sex with his wife. And then I realized to myself, and his country was filled with the Red Death. Maybe, I think that scene is there to show us that Prospero is the carrier of the Red Death. He was the whole time. He was infected from the very beginning, and he got it from that guy's wife. Because we do not know how long the, quote, Red Death, which is supposed to be cholera, but we don't know how long the gestation period really is in this story. We just know that once it takes over you, you bleed, you get red, you go insane, and then you die. But madness is part of it. And I think you could probably make the case that a lot of Prospero's behavior maybe was influenced by the madness of the Red Death. And maybe that's why all of his 1,000 friends are also mad throughout the whole movie. They dance around like animals just to amuse themselves. They freaking, play with knives and almost stab each other. They're insane because they have the plague already. Now, in the short story, it says that the plague takes a half an hour to kill you. But I think that scene is there to show us that that Prospero took all these precautions and was all exclusive about who he lets in and who he doesn't. But the whole time, it was infecting everybody.
That's the interesting concept. I never gave that any thought whatsoever. I never even thought about it that way.
And again, that's probably why, again, spoilers, when the Red Death reveals its face, it's Prospero. So I think it's that maybe also him trying to say, it's all your fault. All this is all your fault. They're all dead because of you. So this party starts, and the reason, I guess some people might not know that the title Masque, it's not mask like you wear a mask, MASKQ. It's a mask ball. So at midnight, he's going to have this party where everyone dresses up in costume. Vincent Price's character Prospero, for reasons, decides to dress up like a sheik from Lawrence of Arabia, except in black. We never explained why that is, but anyway, everybody is dressed up with masks and everything, and at midnight, everyone will take off their masks. And that is also in the story, but he's dancing along with Francesca, and all of a sudden, boom, he sees something in red. And he's like, I forbade them to wear red. Who is that? By the way, I love the way he says forbade. I don't know why. But he's coming along, and he chases after the Red Death and has a conversation with the Red Death, which he doesn't in the book. But he thinks that the Red Death is an emissary of Satan. And that, he's basically come to reward me for all my faithful service. And the Red Death spreads out his hands, and everybody just turns red and bloody. And then we start this Danse Macabre, which is probably the first time in this movie where Corman's camera is so fluid.
Yeah.
The only time where it gets up and moves through the crowd in and it's canted too. Mm-hmm. It's tilted. And all these dead and dying people dancing like a ballet, like a bloody ballet, all around him, silent and dramatic and arch. And Vincent Price is just amused by the whole thing. He's like, "Oh, a jest that would surely amuse Satan. This is amazing. I love this." Basically,
That's one of the reasons why I said I love the cinematography for the end of the movie because the party sequence and it goes so I don't want to say overboard because it doesn't go overboard because uh it's such an impactful sequence the way it is filmed as opposed to the rest of the film. It almost puts the audience into the actual party that's going on. Um, excuse me,
yeah, it feels otherworldly because the whole
otherworld.
movie at this point is not. There's no. He's not going for realism at all. So that's probably maybe one of the stumbling blocks modern audiences might have with this movie is that it doesn't. None of it feels real.
Mm.
And I'm going to tell you guys out there right now, that's okay. That's kind of the vibe this movie is going for. It is a ballet. It is a morality play. That's what Corman was going for. He was going for something dreamlike and weird and arch and theatrical and unreal.
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to be that way. And so that's just kind of part of the appeal of it. So if that's what you like out there, ladies and gentlemen, look no further than this movie. Um, and they had great choreography, like I said, and the music
Oh,
gets in my head. The music gets in my head every time they play that I see it.
you're right.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know about you, but I'm thinking of it in my head right now.
um,
That,
I think in general, this is probably the showiest of all the of Corman's Poe adaptations. Um, I want to say, and I have to rewatch. I think I need to rewatch them all in order because I didn't. And I never saw them in order. I saw them out of order because there's only certain ones on the box set, and then I saw other ones later on when I was getting into Vincent Price films. Um, and so this one seems like it stands the most test of time because it was so different than the rest of them. Not just in terms of the cinematography, not just in terms of, I mean, I forget what the aspect ratio for this one is, but it actually looks like it's a much wider screen for it. So, like,
it is.
Corman
It
put
is.
this one at okay. So Corman would put this one at prestigious theaters instead of drive-in theaters. He wanted people to see this on the big screen as opposed to a lot of those drive-in movies he was doing. It looks different. It feels different. Vincent Price is at he's not he's at some of his best work and not so much the cheesy Vincent Price that a lot of people may take him for. And probably one of the reasons why a lot of people have not looked at this movie is because when you think of Vincent Price, sometimes you think of the cheesy, what was that, the Tingler Vincent Price. You're not thinking of prestigious Vincent Price because, like, I think of Witchfinder General, and I think of this as more of his prestigious films. The Abominable Dr. Fives, I think, is an excellent movie. Stuff like that.
Oh yeah, Witchfinder General is like his most dramatic, like realistically evil performance. Like he's a freaking psychopath in
yeah.
Witchfinder General, and he's a believably scary psychopath in
Mhm.
Witchfinder General. Whereas in this movie, yes, he is a psychopath, but he's also there's a quality to him that's likable, and he's so freaking charismatic. He oozes charisma in this movie, and you almost don't hate him for even when he like almost runs over a freaking child, has people murdered regularly, gloats over his lover's pecked to death corpse.
Yeah.
So I feel like this movie kind of exemplifies the the third stage of Vincent Price's career, where when he wasn't trying to do something serious like Witchfinder General, he was basically becoming this urbane, educated man who was at the center of this horrific drama
Yeah.
that you were okay with watching because Vincent Price is in control.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's like up until this point, this scene with the Red Death, Vincent Price is totally in control of this movie. Nobody is even rising to none of the other actors are capable of rising to his level at all. And, plot wise, his character is in control. Performance wise, Vincent Price is in control up until the very end when he realizes he's made a terrible mistake and backed the wrong horse.
Yeah.
And they just kind of, just like all the dancers just like crash over him, and then finally the Red Death has his way with him, basically. not in a weird way, but like, well, yeah, it is kind of weird, but like he follows him to the black room where he finally looks over at him and says, why should you be afraid to die? Your soul has been dead a long time. And he finally dies, and the fear on his face shows that he's not in control anymore, and probably finally realizes that he probably shouldn't have made himself the god of his own little universe.
Yeah. I agree. All right, so we've spoken a lot about this movie and Poe and Roger Corman, and most especially Vincent Price. Are there any final words you'd like to tell everyone in regards to this film? Because we got a lot of Roger Corman films coming up, and we can't say it all in this episode.
Oh, for sure. Well, I will say, like, this movie has a nice little coda at the end where you find out that there's not just the Red Death, there's the Yellow Death, the Black Death, the White Death, the Golden Death, and they all talk to each other, which is cool. Basically showing the theme of like who rules the world, and it's like this kind of divine council of beings, basically, who really truly rule the world. So, and I think that playful kind of scene. Somebody pointed out, I don't know who it was, but said that basically Corman's other influence shows here, not just Bergman, but Mario Bava was definitely influence on this movie. So, yeah, I think that's pretty cool. And of course, the very last line of the movie is "Sic transit gloria mundi, so passes the glory of the world." The commentators on this Blu-ray also wonder why this movie wasn't remade shortly after the pandemic. I wonder why too.
You know what? This would be an excellent movie to remake in this time.
Yeah, I think Flanagan's version is the closest we're gonna get. So.
I think from what you've told me now, I think you might be right. I think someone would be very scared.
Yeah.
Give it a few years, maybe someone will be brave enough to do it. Or someone who's just on the edge of telling these type of edgy, politically motivated type films with stories like that. I think this could work really well in the modern day audience, if done properly.
For sure, I would. You know what I would love to see? I would love to see somebody. I mean, Herzog's still alive. I would love to see Herzog do a version of Masque of the Red Death.
Interesting.
Or like somebody of an artist of his caliber. Yes, we do think that Roger Corman was an auteur, and he showed it with this movie.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not an auteur on the level of somebody like a Bergman or a Werner Herzog or a David Lynch. I like somebody like one of those guys. I would love to see them do, or even the Coen brothers. I'd love to see them do a version of Masque of the Red Death, because I feel like, especially Herzog or especially David Lynch, that would kind of play to a lot of their symbolic, dreamlike predilections. Another thing to say, I think, is I don't have a Schwarzenegger-nator for this, even though, and I'll tell you why, because nobody could say these lines like "she just married a friend of mine," like Vincent Price. He was the master of the one-liners before and after someone gets murdered. So I'm not even gonna try to approach that.
Understandable.
But so the New York Times, big fancy New York Times, reviewed this movie and said it is, quote, vulgar, naive, and highly amusing. And it is played with gusto on its own level. It's astonishingly good.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, and I don't know why he's considered it vulgar, because by today's standards, it's definitely not. But in fact, I would say this movie is high art by today's standards. But yeah, it's so enduring. It's so timely and timeless.
Yeah.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's one of Roger Corman's favorite of his own movies.
Mm.
It's definitely probably, I think it's probably the favorite of his Poe movies for sure. Yeah. And so the question is, I mean, for me personally, I think it's probably, I'm not, I need to rewatch Pit and the Pendulum, but I think the movie is probably a tie with Pit and the Pendulum, but we'll talk about that next time. In the meantime, I have to ask myself, what do I rate this movie?
Yes, how are you going to rate this one?
Well, I think the only object of this movie that defines this movie, that's filled with all kinds of theological and political subtext and dreamlike imagery and all this stuff we talked about in blood, I think the only thing I can pick is Vincent Price's pencil-thin mustache.
Oh my God. Okay, how are you going to rate that then?
I would say, honestly, I have to say, like, on this rewatch, I think I would have rated this. I would have rated this movie back in the day. I would have given it the four pencil thin mustaches out of 5. But I'm gonna dock it a little bit because as I rewatched it, I realized that the middle act of this movie is kind of slow. In screenwriting, your middle act is supposed to be the thing that kind of builds to support the third act.
Yeah,
because this is a third act movie. Let's face it. All the good stuff really happens at the end, or at least towards the end.
Okay.
And so I feel like Corman and Beaumont, for all their best efforts, I feel like the middle part just doesn't quite gel. I mean, there's parts of it that are great, but yeah, I just think they could have done better.
Okay.
So I'm gonna give it 3.5 Vincent Price pencil thin mustaches out of 5.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna remain with my 4, mostly because I love the look of this film. I love the look of this. I love the cinematography for this film as opposed to some of Roger Corman's other films. And some of the Poe film adaptations I have seen. I've seen them all, but I've seen them out of order, and I've seen some of them more than others. I hope to get around to seeing them all in order, so I can see the progression. I would love to be able to see them like that. The thing is, I've watched them out of order and randomly and not all at once, and so it's kind of weird for me because this is the showier one of all of them. I would think that Pit and Pendulum is the second showiest of all of them.
Oh yeah.
So it's always going to be a toss up for me between those two until I watch them all, so I can see the progression. And I wish I'd had a chance to rewatch it and reevaluate it much better than my remembrance of it when I watched it a couple years ago for my Hazel Court tribute weekend. Because I don't think I rewatched any of the other ones other than Pit and Pendulum. I rewatched this one. I rewatched, and The Tombs of Elijah are the only ones I've rewatched. And the Haunted Palace I've only ever seen once. I don't remember that at all. I don't seem to recall that movie at all. I think I watched it once, didn't hit me at all, and I've forgotten it. So I'm going to stick with my 4 until I rewatch all of them again in order, so I can kind of see his progression as a filmmaker and the progression of each of the Poe films. Because I've been told that they get better, and then they peak, and then they kind of fall off. And who knows what the reasoning for that is. If I had the commentaries like you and I could listen to all the commentaries, I could probably kind of piece together all that.
That's kind of funny you say that somebody said they fall off, because this movie was released second to last.
Yeah.
It's this one and then Tomb of Lygia, and then that was it for Corman's contribution to the Poe.
So Tomb of Lygia, I enjoyed, and that's the one I told you I just rewatched more. I've seen that one. I've seen Pit and Pendulum, and this one the most. I think I've actually seen Tomb of Lygia like 4 times. I've seen this one 3 times because of my Hazel Court thing. The one I Palace, I don't even remember when that was made. I don't remember anything about it. I know I've seen it, but that's all I can tell you about it.
Haunted Palace is interesting only because it's probably one of the first adaptations of an H.P. Lovecraft short story. It is an adaptation of The Case of Charles Dexter Ward, which was made into a more interesting movie by Stuart Gordon called The Resurrected, where a mad scientist, raises people from the dead, and it gets messy, but not in a fun reanimator sort of way. It was much more serious. But yeah, the Strange Case of Charles Dexter Ward. But I think basically what they did was like Corman just basically cut and pasted a poem titled The Haunted Palace, which is a really interesting, sad, and haunting poem, by the way, and just put it as the name of this thing and just adapted this Lovecraft story. It has Lon Chaney Jr. in it as like this mutant with a green face.
I see. I've got to rewatch it. I don't remember anything about that damn
there's a cool monster at the end of the movie that does absolutely nothing, but he's cool to look at. And it has a twist ending, which is interesting. The twist ending you might not see coming, and surprisingly dark for the '60s. So yeah, that is what I vaguely remember. Haunted Palace. I don't think I've seen that one all the way through either. I think I've seen bits and pieces of it. Because primarily, back in the day, ladies and gentlemen, you could just change channels. If you were watching something, if you got bored with something, you could just flip to the next few stations and watch something. And that's what we did back then. We didn't just rage quit something on Netflix and just, spend hours, scrolling, trying to find the next thing we're going to watch.
Oh, Jesus. Well,
so, I would say like the last thing I think we can close this out with is before we say goodbye to everybody, I reread the short story, like I said before this podcast, just to compare and contrast. And I think I'm going to read my favorite line from the story as the last word. It's not a famous line from the story, which of course, the most famous line is literally the one they quote at the end of this movie. But no, I'm gonna read this from Masque of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe. There are chords in the hearts of the most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion, even with the utterly lost, to whom life and death are equally jests. There are matters of which no jest can be made.
Okay. Well, with that, everyone, we're going to leave you with thinking more about both Edgar Allan Poe and Roger Corman, and we hope you enjoyed this episode. We're going to have a lot more of this coming up in later weeks, so please make sure to check us out on your favorite podcast apps and or on our direct website, which is with Libsyn. I almost forgot. Libsyn, or on our YouTube page. Don't forget to check out our Conversations in 4Color podcast, which is only on my Patreon page, and we have tons of stuff coming up as well. And since we mentioned it in this episode, check out our tribute weekend for Hazel Court. You'll be able to see or hear some of my commentary on this movie when I did that. That's from a few years back. You can also find that on YouTube on our page as well as on Vimeo. With that, thank you so much for joining us on Conversations in Horror. We love bringing this conversation about Roger Corman film to you, and everyone out there, have a pleasant day.
Nevermore.
Conversations in Horror is a Broken Lighthouse Pictures production, produced by Kevin L. Powers, executive produced by Kelly A. Inoka, and originally filmed via Zoom technology. Conversations in Horror is hosted by Kevin L. Powers and co-hosted by various horror film lovers and filmmakers. To learn more about Mr. Powers, please make sure to check out his Patreon page and other social media platforms. Conversations in Horror is copyright 2024 Broken Lighthouse Pictures production.